You are performing this repair at your own risk. You cannot be held responsible for any injuries to yourself or damage done to your device while attempting a repair. In this video, we'll be demonstrating how to replace the front glass on the iPad 2. Chances are your touchscreen still works fine. It's usually just a cosmetic issue. Depending on how bad it's cracked, it can be a hazard. The extent to which your glass is cracked will also determine the difficulty of replacement. The fewer the cracks, the easier the replacement. Here's a look at our replacement front glass and digitizer. The digitizer is on the underside of the glass, which is what this cable here leads to. The digitizer detects your touch. Because these two parts are adhered together, it's not possible to replace just the front glass. Do not buy just the front glass expecting to repair your iPad, because it will not be possible. We'll also be using a special pre-cut double-sided adhesive to adhere our new glass to the frame. There are a few tools which you will certainly need to complete this repair. The most important being the metal spudger. This will allow you to pry up the old glass. We'll also need a small Phillips screwdriver to remove 4 screws that hold the LCD screen in place, as the digitizer cable plugs in beneath the LCD. Superglue gel will also be very helpful at strengthening the bond. Superglue gel does not run like original superglue, so you want to be sure to use the gel. This will be applied around the perimeter in between the double-sided adhesive and the front glass. A heat gun is also going to be very helpful. If you don't have a heat gun, you can use a hairdryer. The heat gun is used to soften the adhesive when removing our old glass. And finally, another handy tool will be a compressed air canister, which will help clear dust from the glass and the LCD screen. Now, getting started with removing the glass. We will want to apply packaging tape over all areas where the glass is badly cracked to prevent it from breaking up. You'll also want to wear a pair of safety glasses and perhaps some rubber protective gloves while prying up the old glass for protection. Now, there are a few areas where you need to be careful or avoid altogether if you don't want to further damage your iPad, in which case it would require more repair than just the front glass. Here's a look at our iPad with the glass removed. In the top right, we have the power volume flex cable. Be careful when prying around this area. If you have a 3G iPad, be careful of 2 antennas located at the top. In between these 2 antennas is the camera. These antennas will stick to the front glass while you're prying it up, so you need to get in between those antennas and the glass. Along the left side of our iPad, the LCD screen is very close to the edge, so you don't want to go too deep with your metal pry tool. Our sync port and home button assembly are located at the bottom center of the iPad. Be careful of this area. Just to the right of that is the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth antenna. This is the most commonly torn cable when removing the glass. You'll need to get in between this antenna and the glass, because that antenna will stick to the glass while removing it. With our iPad powered off, we'll go ahead and heat the left side with our heat gun or hairdryer, which will soften the adhesive, holding the glass to the frame. We're going to wedge in between the plastic bezel and the glass. There's a thin plastic bezel that goes around the perimeter of the glass. We'll need to pry in between this bezel and the glass, which will allow us to get underneath of the glass. It's not a bad idea to replace the bezel when replacing the glass, nor is it much more work. If you're having trouble getting your pry tool underneath of the glass, you may need to soften the adhesive more. Once we get that pry tool underneath the glass, we'll want to keep our tool as flat and level with the glass as possible. If you have it tilted upward, you risk shattering the glass and making the repair more difficult. We'll demonstrate this later on. With our tool wedged underneath the glass, we'll reheat the left side so that we can slide our tool up and down this side and free the glass from the adhesive. We'll use one tool as a placeholder to keep the glass up in that area and slide our second tool along the edge. Remember, this is a side where the LCD is pretty close to the edge, so you don't want to insert your tool too deep. Here's a side view where you can see the glass being slightly raised away from the adhesive holding it in place. We'll continue to reapply heat and work our way around the perimeter of the iPad to free the glass from the adhesive. We'll also need to be extremely cautious around the danger areas. Now here we're approaching the digitizer cable. This is where the digitizer cable goes beneath the iPad LCD screen and plugs into the logic board. It may be difficult to pry around this area, although it's not a hazard area because even if we tear that cable, we're replacing the part anyway. After freeing the adhesive on one side, we'll move to the next. Once we free the adhesive on all four sides of the glass, we can open it up to the left like a book, in the direction of where the digitizer cable plugs in. At the top portion, if you have the 3G version, remember to be extremely careful of the two 3G antennas. Now whether you have the 3G or Wi-Fi, it will have a front-facing camera located at the top center. Avoid this area. Here you can see the glass further coming up as we make progress along the top. Remember to be extremely careful of the 3G antennas if you're dealing with the 3G version, which are located on opposite sides of the top front-facing camera. The adhesive holding the top glass in place on the 3G version sticks to the 3G antennas. You'll want to wedge in between these cables and the glass. Continue applying heat to keep the adhesive soft and help with the removal of the glass. We'll work our way slowly so as not to damage any of the cables up top. Here we can see one of the two 3G antennas sticking to the glass. If you don't pry this away carefully, it will come up with the glass and tear, requiring replacement. Next, we'll work on the right side of the glass. It's this side of the iPad where we have to watch out for the power volume flex cable. This cable is commonly torn when removing the glass. Don't insert your tool too far, and also make sure the cable is not sticking to the glass while you pry it up. We're going to start at the bottom where there's no danger spots and work our way up to the power volume flex cable. Now you can watch closely here and understand why it's extremely important to keep your glass hot and the tool level with the iPad glass and slide it along the side as opposed to lifting in the upward direction. This front glass, having only cracks in the lower left hand corner, could have been a straightforward removal. If you're not careful, this can happen and make the repair a lot more difficult, as we now have to chisel away all the individual shards of glass before we can open up the iPad screen like a book and remove the glass entirely. We'll now return to the upper right hand portion where the power volume flex cable is located. You can see we've chiseled away a portion of the glass to show part of the cable. Although this is only part of the cable, this is the most common area where the cable is torn. You should still continue to be careful about 3 inches below this location. And here's a look beneath the glass at the entire power volume flex cable. As you can see, this customer's iPad does have a torn cable. Here we'll free the glass from the bottom side of the iPad. Here we'll need to be careful of the Wi-Fi antenna and the home button assembly. Here you can see the Wi-Fi antenna. Be sure to pry in between this antenna and the glass, and not beneath it. If you pry beneath it, the cable will easily tear. Once we free the bottom side from the adhesive, we'll be able to open the glass up to the left and cut the digitizer cable and remove the glass entirely. When lifting out the glass, be extremely careful not to slip and scratch the LCD screen. We'll very carefully use our tool to lift the screen in the upward direction and towards the left side of the iPad. While you're doing this, ensure that no cables are sticking to the glass and peeling up with it. Should any small glass shards fall on the LCD screen, you can blow most of them off with your air canister. If they stick to the screen, use a small plastic tool or a cloth to gently wipe them away. Do not touch the LCD screen with your fingers because fingerprints are extremely difficult to remove from the screen. For our convenience, we'll take a pair of scissors and cut the digitizer cable so we can free the glass from the iPad. We'll need to recover the home button assembly and the top metal camera shield, as these will be installed on our replacement glass. Our next step will be to remove all excess glass and adhesive from the perimeter of the iPad. We'll now need to carefully remove the LCD screen so that we can access the digitizer port to install our new glass. There's a total of 4 Phillips screws that we'll need to remove, 1 in each corner of the screen. With these screws removed, we can wedge up our LCD screen. Be very careful, as the LCD screen is an expensive part to replace. Carefully open the LCD up as we did with the front glass. It's still connected by a cable in the lower left-hand corner. We'll give you a close-up view on just how to release this cable so that we do not damage the port. Here we'll use our small flathead screwdriver to pry up the metal bar securing this cable inside its port. We're now free to unplug this cable from its port on the logic board. Carefully pull out, keeping the cable level with its port. With this cable removed, we're free to set the LCD screen aside in a safe place. We'll next need to remove the old digitizer cable. We'll need to undo 2 small Phillips screws so that we can remove this metal plate blocking one of the latches. Now we'll use our small flathead screwdriver to wedge it beneath this black tab and gently twist. The tab will flip in the vertical direction, releasing the tension holding the cable inside its port. And we'll do the same for the second port. Once both tabs have been released, we're free to slide out the digitizer cable from its ports. We'll now prep our replacement glass for installation. We'll first install the metal camera piece located at the top, and we can use the old adhesive that was already on this piece, and that should hold it in place. If it doesn't, you can use a small amount of super glue gel. Next, we'll reinstall the home button, which is a 2-part process. First, we'll install the home button, and then the actual switch. Again, we can reuse the adhesive on these 2 parts. If it doesn't hold, we can apply a small amount of super glue gel where the adhesive is. Make sure the actual button lines up with the black center piece on the external home button. You can test this by pressing the button on the outside of the screen, and you'll feel the click. If you don't, you'll need to reseat this home button assembly. Before we plug the digitizer cable back in, we'll want to bend it appropriately so it tucks underneath the LCD. Here's a close-up look at how this cable should be bent. Essentially, there's 3 bends, but you don't want to fold it like paper because that could damage the cable. We're now ready to plug the new digitizer cable back into its port. We'll make sure it's positioned right and then carefully slide it into its port. It's a fairly snug fit, so it may take some patience before we can get it to fit right. Finally, we'll very carefully flip these small black tabs back down so that they sit in the horizontal direction. Be extremely careful because you don't want these pieces to either break or come off because they're very difficult to reinstall. Applying pressure from the center of the tab and slightly inward as you're flipping it down should prevent either of these situations from happening. Remember to install the small metal piece covering the left port. We're now ready to plug our LCD back in. Remember to be very cautious about fingerprints getting on the screen. Grab the LCD cable and position it in front of its port on the logic board. Carefully plug it back in so that it's securely in place. Now grab your small flathead screwdriver so that we can push this clamp back down. Gently press so that it snaps below the metal pieces on the side and is securely in place. Now we can flip the screen back down and position it inside of the casing. Be sure that the screw holes on each of the 4 corners line up. Now go ahead and reinsert the 4 Phillips screws holding the LCD screen in place. Before we apply our adhesive, or when I want to do a test run, make sure the screen fits in place and there's no dings in the corners that need to be buffed out. Also, we'll want to give our iPad a full test to ensure full functionality before closing up the screen. You should test the following. Is there any issue with the LCD screen? Dead pixels, bleeding, cracks? Is there any dead spots in the touchscreen? Can you open up all icons? Does the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth antenna work? Does the power, mute, and volume keys function? Is a home button functional? Does the new glass fit flush? Or does the casing need to be bent slightly outward to accommodate the new glass? Does the headphone jack work? Is the microphone working? Does the front and rear facing camera function? If it's a 3G version, does it detect the SIM card? Can you pick up a 3G signal? Be sure that all these are functional. If you encounter any issues, you may need to replace additional parts in order to get your iPad fully functional. Following successful testing verification, we're ready to apply our pre-cut adhesive around the perimeter of the inside of the iPad. During application, try to keep the adhesive as close to the edge as possible without overlapping the bezel. You may find it helpful to take your small flathead screwdriver and run it against the bezel as you're applying the adhesive. This will prevent it from overlapping the bezel. If you misplace or destroy a part of the adhesive, you can always purchase double-sided tape from the hardware store and cut it to the dimensions that you need. For our final adhesive strip, we'll have to flip the digitizer over so that the cable is not in our way. We've now completed the installation of all pre-cut strips. Next, we can go ahead and remove the paper backing covering the double-sided tape. With the paper backings removed from the adhesive, we'll take our superglue gel and apply a blob to a post-it note or a small sheet of paper. It's important to use superglue gel and not actual superglue because the superglue will run and it won't be possible to apply it in the manner as we're doing now. Superglue gel also has a slightly longer set time, which will allow us ample time to apply the superglue gel around the entire perimeter of the iPad. We're going to want to apply it on top of our pre-cut adhesive. We'll want to apply a very small dab in about half-inch increments around the perimeter of the iPad. Now the reason that we put the superglue gel on top of the adhesive is for a stronger bond in the end. But also, because the superglue is in between the glass and the adhesive, it's removable if we ever need to replace the screen again. It's not a permanent set in the iPad. For our application, we're using a small flathead screwdriver to apply our superglue. You may find another tool to be useful. However, if you do use a small flathead, be sure to wipe it off after completing the application. Also, while you're applying the superglue, each time you grab more, be sure not to go above the LCD because we don't want any superglue falling on the LCD because it will not come off. Before closing the glass, it's a good last step to take your air canister and blow off the LCD screen. Don't tilt the air canister too much because then you risk the liquid from the inside spraying on the screen. Next, peel the protector from the inside of the glass. Now we'll quickly want to flip the screen over so that no dust gets on the glass. We'll first line up the glass on the left side so that it's flush with the bezel, and also make sure that the digitizer cable is correctly bent and not forcing the glass up in that area. The metal camera piece also has 2 notches that fit in the camera. Make sure those line up. We'll now work our way around the perimeter of the glass and make sure that it's flush on all sides. Apply a medium pressure along the perimeter as you're working your way around. This will ensure that the glass is secured to the adhesive. Next, apply heat to the perimeter of the iPad to make the adhesive extra soft and sticky. So that our new glass seats properly, we'll want to apply clamps around the perimeter of the iPad. If you don't have clamps available, a large book should do the job. Let the new screen set for 30 to 45 minutes.